I snuck into a boutique and slipped into a dress. Over the months that followed, life felt like it had shifted into fast forward for Talia and Finn, in the best possible way. Their love deepened naturally, settling into a steady rhythm that felt both exciting and secure. They spent countless evenings together, cooking dinner, taking long walks, sharing quiet laughter, yet never lost themselves in the process. Talia still made time for her friends and career, and Finn continued nurturing his passions too. What they built wasn't just romance, it was balance. At work, Talia flourished. Fully embracing her identity gave her a confidence that radiated through every meeting and presentation. Her colleagues had become a second family, cheering her on and standing beside her through every challenge. Dee, especially, had become her anchor, offering wise counsel, quick humor, and unwavering loyalty. When summer softened into fall, they escaped to a peaceful seaside town for a weekend away. They rented a cozy cottage perched above the ocean, its windows framing endless blue. Days were spent wandering through charming streets lined with little shops and cafes. Evenings belonged to the shoreline, where they watched the sky melt into shades of amber and rose. On their final night, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in gold and coral, Finn slowed his steps. He turned to face her, emotion shining in his eyes. "Talia," he said softly, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You are brave, radiant, and extraordinary. I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it." Her heart pounded as he lowered himself onto one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision before she could answer. "Yes," she breathed, laughing through sobs. "Yes, of course." He slid a delicate diamond ring onto her finger, and as they kissed, the waves brushed against their feet like a quiet blessing from the sea. Their engagement was met with overwhelming joy. Friends and family flooded them with congratulations. Ellen immediately took charge of planning an engagement celebration, which became a lively tribute to their journey, full of laughter, stories, and heartfelt toasts. Wedding preparations soon began, bringing excitement and complexity. Choosing a dress stirred unexpected emotions for Talia. Standing beneath bright dressing room lights, trying on gown after gown, she sometimes felt old insecurities whispering at the edges of her happiness. But Finn, Dee, and Ellen reminded her again and again of her strength and beauty. And then she found it. A flowing A-line gown with lace sleeves and a sweetheart neckline. When she stepped out to show Dee and Ellen, their tearful smiles told her everything. For the first time, she didn't just see a bride in the mirror, she saw herself. Another delicate matter lingered, her parents. Though they had come far in accepting her transition, unspoken tensions sometimes remained. After talking it through with Finn and her therapist, Talia invited them to dinner. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. But it would mean the world to me to have you there, and, Dad, to have you walk me down the aisle." Her mother reached for her hand immediately. "Of course we'll be there." Her father's eyes glistened. "It would be my honor." Relief and gratitude wrapped around her heart like a warm embrace. The months flew by, and suddenly the morning of the wedding had arrived. Talia awoke before dawn, nerves fluttering in her stomach. As she sat before the mirror, Dee carefully brushed shimmer onto her eyelids while Ellen pinned her hair into soft waves. Surrounded by love, she thought back to the frightened version of herself from years before, the one unsure if she'd ever truly belong. Now she was here. Whole. Unapologetic. Cherished. When the chapel doors opened and she stepped forward on her father's arm, the world narrowed to Finn's face. The awe in his eyes steadied her. Their vows were personal and heartfelt, reflecting every obstacle they'd overcome and every promise they intended to keep. When they were pronounced husband and wife, cheers filled the chapel. The reception sparkled with joy. They shared their first dance to the same song that had played the night they reconnected at Ellen's dinner party, a quiet tribute to where it all began. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and love filled every corner of the room. Later that evening, Talia slipped onto a balcony overlooking the city lights. She breathed in the cool night air, reflecting on the long path that had led her here. Finn joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Everything all right, Mrs. Thompson?" She smiled at the sound of her new name. "Everything's perfect, Mr. Thompson. I was just thinking about how far I've come." He kissed her temple gently. "You're the strongest person I know. I'm just lucky you chose me." She turned in his arms, resting her forehead against his. "No," she whispered, smiling through tears of gratitude. "We chose each other." And beneath the glow of the city and the promise of tomorrow, they stood, hand in hand, ready to begin the next chapter of their beautiful, shared life. Lost, they stood together beneath the soft shimmer of city lights, wrapped in the warmth of their new marriage. Talia felt something she had once thought impossible: complete peace. The road to self-acceptance had not been easy. It had been marked by doubt, courage, setbacks, and triumphs. But in Finn's arms, surrounded by people who loved her fully and without hesitation, she knew every step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of her entire journey. Finn smiled, his eyes bright. "I love you too. I always have. I always will." Below them, music and laughter floated up from the reception, a reminder that this was not a finish line, it was a beginning. Whatever lay ahead, they would meet it together. Married life suited them. The years that followed were filled with growth, both joyful and challenging. Talia thrived professionally, eventually stepping into a senior management role that reflected her talent and determination. Finn's architectural career flourished as well. His firm began securing high-profile projects that allowed his creativity to shine. Their home became more than a place to live. It became a refuge. A gathering space. Dinner parties stretched late into the evening, game nights grew competitive and loud, and holidays were celebrated with traditions that blended old and new. Friends became family in every way that mattered. About 2 years into their marriage, a new conversation began to take shape, quiet at first, then increasingly heartfelt. A family. The discussions were layered and emotional. They sat up late at night weighing possibilities, meeting with doctors, researching options. Adoption. Surrogacy. Different paths, each with its own complexities. For Talia, the process stirred tender feelings. There were moments when grief surfaced, an ache for the biological experience she would never have. In those moments, Finn would take her hands and remind her gently that parenthood was not defined by biology, but by love, commitment, and presence. Family, he would say, is built by the heart. After careful thought, they chose adoption. The process tested their patience: endless paperwork, interviews, home visits, months that stretched into years. There were days when hope felt fragile. But they never stopped believing. Nearly 2 years later, the call finally came. A baby girl had been born. And her birth mother had chosen them. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. When Talia first held the tiny bundle placed in her arms, time seemed to still. All the waiting, the doubts, the hurdles, they dissolved into a single overwhelming truth: this child was theirs. They named her Zoe, life, because that was exactly what she brought into their world. Bringing Zoe home was a celebration. Friends arrived with casseroles and balloons. Dee and Ellen embraced their honorary aunt roles with enthusiasm, showering Zoe with affection. Talia's parents, who had continued to grow and soften over the years, adored their granddaughter completely. Parenthood transformed everything. There were sleepless nights and anxious Googling sessions at 3 a.m. There were moments of exhaustion and second-guessing. But there were also first smiles, tiny fingers wrapping around theirs, soft lullabies in the quiet glow of a nursery lamp. Motherhood fit Talia in a way that felt instinctive and profound. Her nurturing spirit blossomed effortlessly. Each milestone Zoe reached felt like a shared victory. As Zoe grew, Talia and Finn were intentional about the world they created for her. Their bookshelves were filled with stories reflecting all kinds of families. Their home welcomed diversity in every form. Conversations about identity, love, and authenticity were never hidden, they were embraced. When Zoe eventually began asking questions about Talia's journey, they answered gently and honestly, in ways she could understand. They wanted her to grow up knowing that truth is something to be proud of, not concealed. Through every season, new jobs, scraped knees, school recitals, quiet Sunday mornings, their family stood on a foundation built long before Zoe arrived: courage, acceptance, and unwavering love. And in the quiet moments, when Talia would watch Finn reading bedtime stories or feel Zoe's small hand tucked into hers, she would sometimes pause in awe. The life she once feared might never exist had become fuller and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. When Zoe turned 4, Talia and Finn felt their hearts stretching again. One evening, after Zoe had fallen asleep surrounded by stuffed animals and storybooks, they sat together on the couch and talked about expanding their family. This time, they felt called toward foster care. They knew it wouldn't be simple. They knew it would require patience, resilience, and a willingness to step into uncertainty. But they also knew their home had room for one more. A few months later, a 7-year-old boy named Marcus walked through their front door carrying a small duffel bag and far more emotional weight than any child should have to bear. He had been moved from house to house, learning not to get too comfortable, not to trust too quickly. The adjustment wasn't easy. Marcus tested boundaries. He struggled with anger and fear he didn't always have words for. Some nights ended in tears. Some days required long talks, gentle reassurances, and the steady guidance of therapists who helped him untangle the trauma of his early years. But Talia and Finn never wavered. They showed up every day. Zoe, in her own bright and tender way, helped bridge the gap. She took her new role as big sister seriously, inviting Marcus into her games, sitting beside him at dinner, slipping handmade drawings under his bedroom door when he seemed sad. Her empathy softened spaces that adults sometimes couldn't reach. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Marcus began to trust. 2 years later, when the adoption became official, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Marcus gripped Talia's hand tightly as the judge declared them a forever family. Finn squeezed his shoulder. Zoe beamed. Their family of 4 drove home that day with the windows down, music playing, and something steady and unshakable settling into place. Life, of course, wasn't magically perfect. Talia still encountered moments of ignorance from people who didn't understand her history. There were sideways glances, awkward questions, occasional discrimination. Marcus continued working through pieces of his past. Healing wasn't linear. But inside their home, love was constant. Years passed. Zoe grew into a confident, thoughtful young woman who never hesitated to speak up when something felt unfair. Marcus discovered music, his guitar becoming both shield and voice. When he played, emotions he couldn't articulate seemed to pour out in chords and melodies. On the evening of their 15th wedding anniversary, Talia and Finn sat side by side on their back porch. The sky glowed with the fading colors of sunset while laughter drifted from inside, Zoe helping Marcus with homework, the faint hum of guitar strings between explanations. Finn laced his fingers through hers. 15 years, he said softly. Can you believe it? Talia smiled. Some days it feels like it just started. Other days, I can't imagine life any other way. She thought back to a time long before all this, before certainty, before confidence, when fear had nearly convinced her to hide forever. If someone had shown her this future then, she would have struggled to believe it. Thank you, she murmured. For what? Finn asked. For loving me through every chapter. For building this life with me. He brushed his thumb across her knuckles. Loving you has always been the simplest choice I've ever made. As the sun disappeared completely, gratitude settled over her like a warm blanket. She had once believed happiness was a destination, something you reached and held on to. Now she understood it was a practice. A daily commitment to truth, growth, and presence. They went back inside to join the kids for family game night, a sacred weekly ritual. Dice clattered. Laughter erupted. Good-natured teasing filled the room. This, Talia thought, is what happiness looks like. Not flawless. Not without struggle. But real. As the evening wound down and dishes were being cleared, Zoe called out from the kitchen, "Mom. Don't forget my art show tomorrow. You're coming, right?" Talia's face lit up. We wouldn't miss it for anything. Zoe's artistic talent had blossomed in recent years. Her newest series explored identity and self-expression, earning her a spot in a respected youth exhibition at a local gallery. "Can we invite Aunt Dee and Aunt Ellen?" Marcus asked, peeking around the doorway. "Of course," Finn replied. "Give them a call." Later that night, as the house quieted and the children headed to bed, Talia stood in front of the bathroom mirror removing her makeup. Fine lines traced the corners of her eyes. A few strands of silver shimmered near her temples. She didn't see loss. She saw history. Finn stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What's on your mind?" She met his eyes in the mirror. How different things could have been. He was quiet for a moment before asking gently, "Do you ever regret transitioning?" She turned to face him fully. "Never," she said with steady certainty. "It wasn't always easy. But it brought me here, to you, to Zoe and Marcus, to myself. I wouldn't trade that." They slipped into bed, hands finding each other in the dark. As sleep approached, Talia thought about the art show. Zoe had kept her pieces a secret, wanting them to be a surprise. Talia felt a mix of pride and curiosity. Whatever her daughter had created, Talia knew one thing for certain. It would be honest. And honesty, she had learned, was where the most beautiful things begin. Zoe's art had always drawn from real life. She painted what she felt, what she observed, what shaped her. In the days leading up to the exhibition, Talia found herself quietly wondering how much of their family's story might appear on those gallery walls. The next evening, they arrived dressed a little fancier than usual. Marcus wore a blazer he pretended not to care about. Finn had traded his usual casual look for a crisp button-down. Talia chose a deep blue dress Zoe once said made her look like confidence. Dee and Ellen were already at the entrance, waving enthusiastically. "There's our star family," Ellen declared, pulling Zoe into a proud hug. Inside, the gallery buzzed with conversation and soft instrumental music. White walls, warm lighting, clusters of people studying canvases thoughtfully. Talia felt her nerves flicker as they moved toward the back, where Zoe's collection was displayed. And then she saw it. The centerpiece stopped her in her tracks. It was a portrait, large, bold, impossible to ignore. Her. The canvas was split vertically down the center. On one side stood the woman she was now, strong posture, steady gaze, warmth in her expression. On the other side was an interpretation of her earlier self, not caricatured, not diminished, but reflective. Thoughtful. Searching. The two halves weren't separated harshly, they blended into one another in strokes of layered color, suggesting movement rather than division. It wasn't about before and after. It was about continuity. About becoming. Around the central portrait were smaller paintings, intimate snapshots of their life. Finn sitting cross-legged with Marcus, guiding his fingers along guitar strings. Flower dust in the air as Talia and Zoe laughed over lopsided cookies. All four of them tangled together on the couch during movie night, faces lit by television glow. Every piece radiated warmth. Talia felt tears blur her vision. She turned to Zoe, who stood rigid beside her, clearly bracing for judgment. "Oh, sweetheart," Talia whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's extraordinary. I'm so proud of you." Zoe exhaled shakily. "I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to tell our story. About how people can grow. About how love doesn't disappear, it transforms. Finn wrapped his arms around both of them. You captured something really powerful, he said gently. This is brave work. Talia looked back at the portrait. For years, she had feared being defined only by her transition. But here, in her daughter's interpretation, it wasn't a label. It was part of a larger story. A story about resilience. About family. About becoming whole. The rest of the evening passed in a swirl of handshakes, kind words, and thoughtful conversations. Several visitors lingered at Zoe's section longer than anywhere else. A few paintings were marked sold before the night ended. As they prepared to leave, an older woman approached Talia hesitantly. I hope it's all right to say this, she began softly. Your daughter's work moved me deeply. Talia smiled. Thank you. The woman clasped her purse with trembling fingers. My granddaughter recently told us she's transgender. I've been trying to understand. I love her, but I've been afraid of saying the wrong thing. Seeing your family here tonight, it helped. It reminded me that love is bigger than my confusion. Emotion rose in Talia's throat. She reached out and gently took the woman's hands. You don't have to have all the answers, Talia said kindly. Just keep showing up. Keep listening. That's what matters most. The woman nodded, eyes glistening. Thank you. As they walked out of the gallery together, Zoe between them, Marcus animatedly explaining which piece he thought should have sold first, Talia felt something settle deep inside her. Their journey had never been about perfection. It had been about truth. And now, through her daughter's art, that truth had reached beyond their home and touched someone else's heart. Finn squeezed her hand as they stepped into the cool night air. You okay? He asked quietly. Talia looked at her family, at Zoe glowing with accomplishment, at Marcus teasing her about being famous, at Dee and Ellen arguing playfully about where to celebrate. She smiled. More than okay, she said. I'm grateful.